Hello, my beautiful and amazing friends. Welcome back to our SL. Today, we've got a mix of crazy stories, a wrongful firing at Walmart, a revenge plot over a phone number, and some hilarious drama and top-tier trolling that will leave you speechless. I hope you enjoy these stories, just try not to shake your head too hard. As always, you can send or link your posts to this email right here. Now, let's dive in. Story 1, Hilarious, Fired from Walmart. First up, we have an IDontWorkHereLady drama where the OP, original poster, got fired from a place she didn't even work at, and the ending left all of Reddit stunned. OP was just a regular person, stopping by Walmart to grab some groceries, the kind of place with long, messy aisles, the scent of fresh bread mixing with the crackling announcements over the intercom, and the blinding fluorescent lights reflecting off shiny tile floors. OP wrote, "I got fired by a power-hungry Walmart manager even though I didn't work there." Now for the update, she got arrested and lost her job. The star of this drama? Ms. M, the Walmart manager, whom OP described as, about 40 years old, hair tied in a greasy bun, wearing a wrinkled navy blue uniform, her name tag hanging crooked, and a voice as shrill as a fire alarm, acting like she owned the entire store. OP recounted, "Ms. M mistook me for an employee and kicked me out of Walmart. I wasn't about to let that slide, and the way this whole thing played out had me clapping and laughing. This is a story about mistaken identity, power trips, and an epic twist. Are you ready? Buckle up, because Ms. M is about to shoot herself in the foot, and OP is about to make you cheer for the next 30 minutes. The chaos begins. You're fired. It all started late at night, when Walmart was nearly empty, save for a few customers and night shift workers. OP recalled, "I was wearing a gray hoodie, a cap, and pushing my shopping cart down the household aisle, the one filled with messy stacks of brooms and plastic buckets. I was looking for paper towels when Ms. M stormed in from the customer service desk, gripping her walkie-talkie, scanning the store like she was hunting for trouble. Then she shouted over the intercom noise, 'Hey, you! Why aren't you stocking the shelves? Get to work.' OP froze and turned to her. I don't work here." Ms. M frowned, her voice going full siren mode. "Don't lie to me. I've seen you wandering around all night. Get to work or you're fired." OP wrote, "I stood there, watching her throw her weight around, and thought, all right lady, you wanna play? Let's play." Instead of yelling back, OP trolled her instead. I shrugged, smirked, and said, "Sure, go ahead and fire me." Ms. M's face turned red, and she slammed her walkie-talkie onto the counter. "You're fired. Get out of my store." OP crossed her arms. "You're not my boss. I'm a customer." Ms. M lost it. "Customers don't dress like employees. Get out." OP laughed. "All right then, call security. Let's see who's right." At this point, even Walmart's night staff started whispering. One of them muttered, "Ugh, Ms. M is at it again." Meanwhile, OP was having the time of her life, watching Ms. M dig her own grave. Security arrives. She's a customer. When security finally showed up, OP took the trolling to the next level. A security guard, let's call him T, a guy in his 30s wearing a black uniform, walked over and asked, "What's going on?" Ms. M pointed at me like she just caught a criminal. "She won't work, so I fired her." Guard T turned to OP, "Do you work here?" OP grinned. "Nope. I'm just shopping. Here's my cart." Guard T sighed and turned back to Ms. M, "Ma'am, she's a customer." Ms. M screamed. "No. I know she works here. Kick her out." OP pulled out her phone. "I recorded everything. Want me to post it online?" Suddenly, Ms. M froze. Her hands started shaking. Security radioed the store's general manager, a guy we'll call H, in his 50s wearing a white dress shirt. And that's when things got really good. The consequences: you're really fired now. When Manager H arrived, he watched OP's video and looked furious. H turned to Ms. M and asked, "Did you just try to fire a customer?" Ms. M stammered, I thought she was an employee. She was loitering. Manager H sighed. Apologize to her. Now. Ms. M mumbled, I'm sorry. OP shrugged. No worries, just, maybe don't fire customers next time. But here's where it gets even better, the update that broke Reddit. A few days later, security cameras caught Ms. M destroying merchandise in the stockroom out of anger. She was arrested for vandalism and officially fired. OP posted the video online, and the internet lost it. Guard T even messaged OP afterward, Ms. M is gone. Thanks for exposing her. The aftermath, a Walmart legend is born. The final punchline? OP returned to Walmart weeks later, and the employees recognized her immediately. A cashier laughed and said, You're the one who got fired, huh? OP grinned. Yep. Just don't fire me again, okay? Other employees joked about it for weeks. OP became a local legend. Reddit explodes. Whose side are you on? The comments section was chaos. Team OP, Ms. M got what she deserved. OP handled this like a champ. Team Ms. M, she was stressed, maybe OP went too far? Trolls, next time, OP should wear a Walmart uniform just to mess with people. Personally, I'm 100% Team OP. But what do you think? Was OP a genius, or was Ms. M just unlucky? Have you ever been mistaken for an employee? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned. Next up, we've got a revenge story involving a phone number you won't want to miss. Story 2, Humor, accidentally posting a phone number in the newspaper. Next up, we have a pro-revenge drama where OP accidentally turned a mistake into a perfect act of revenge that made their enemy's life miserable. OP is just an ordinary person, living in a small apartment, the kind with a kitchen table stained with coffee rings, the faint smell of toast from an old toaster, the static hum of the TV playing ads mixed with street noises, and a peaceful atmosphere, until drama hit. OP wrote, I accidentally posted a phone number in a newspaper ad, and it became the perfect weapon to get back at a terrible friend. The main character of this drama is Mr. B, an old friend turned enemy, whom OP describes as around 30 years old, with messy short hair, always wearing a crumpled black t-shirt, shifty eyes like he's always scheming, a loud and cocky voice, and an attitude like the whole world owes him something. OP shared, B had wronged me before, and by sheer accident, I posted his number in an ad. The way things spiraled out of control made him suffer his own karma. OP had only wanted to sell some old furniture for a bit of cash, but one small mistake led to a hilarious act of revenge that had me clapping and laughing. This is a story of confusion, newspapers, and an epic troll. Are you ready? Buckle up, because B is about to drown in phone calls, and OP is going to make you cheer for nearly 40 minutes straight. It all started with a Saturday morning. The drama began on a quiet Saturday morning when OP decided to clean up and sell some old stuff. OP wrote, I was sitting at my kitchen table, a small wooden one covered in scratches, next to a pile of old newspapers and a cup of cold coffee, writing a classified ad to sell my old sofa, used sofa, $50, call this number. I typed in the number on my laptop, intending to post it in the local newspaper. But I made a deadly mistake. Instead of my number, I typed B's, the same B who had borrowed $200 from me and never paid me back. OP submitted the ad without double-checking. I stood there, realizing, oops, wrong number. But then I laughed, let's see what happens. At this point, I wanted to scream, OP, you just unintentionally set a revenge plan into motion. The phone call avalanche begins. The next day, B was bombarded with calls. OP shared. The morning after, B texted me, WTF did you do? My phone won't stop ringing. I played dumb, huh? What are you talking about? He yelled, someone put my number in a sofa ad. Was it you? I laughed, no idea. Must be a mistake. But the truth was, the ad had spread like wildfire. Dozens of people were calling B. From old ladies asking about the sofa, to delivery guys asking for an address, to a drunk uncle calling at 2 a.m. asking, "Still got that sofa?" OP continued. I listened to B rant and thought, serves you right for scamming me. My friend, H, even messaged, "Whoever pranked B like this is a genius." I was smug. OP, you just made B swim in a flood of phone calls. Turning up the heat. Rather than stopping there, OP escalated the chaos. I called B, pretending to be concerned. "Are you okay? Getting too many calls?" He yelled, "I'm changing my number. Stop calling me." But I wasn't done yet. I reposted the ad on a local Facebook group, still with B's number, adding, "Beautiful sofa, call ASAP before it's gone." The result? B's phone blew up, non-stop, day and night. Some people even texted, "Are you scamming me? Where's the sofa?" B called me, voice shaking, "You did this? I'm calling the cops." I calmly replied, "Go ahead. It was just a number mix-up." OP wrote. I stood there, listening to B freak out, thinking, "You scammed me, now you pay the price." H later updated me, B shut off his phone completely. I laughed so hard, "OP, you just turned a mistake into an all-time legendary troll." B's reputation in ruins. Things got even worse for B as he unintentionally brought humiliation upon himself. B changed his number, but the ad was still online. Someone even printed it and posted flyers around the neighborhood, so his old number kept getting calls even after he canceled it. B texted me, "Have you had enough? Pay me back my piece." I replied, "What piece? You still owe me $200. B went silent. Then H messaged, "B's landlord is pissed because random people keep knocking, asking about the sofa. He's in hiding now." OP wrote. I thought, "You brought this on yourself." A week later, B moved out, avoiding everyone. I was ecstatic. "OP, you made B flee the entire neighborhood." The grand finale, B disappears. In the end, OP got the last laugh while B vanished. I ended up selling my sofa to a neighbor for $50 and shared the story about the wrong number. The whole block laughed their heads off. H messaged, "B is now terrified of unknown numbers. Your revenge is legendary." Apparently, B sold his old number to someone else, so now a new person was getting spammed with sofa calls instead. OP wrote. I sat back, reminiscing about it all, thinking, one little mistake turned into pro-revenge. Now, I double-check my numbers, but I'll never forget laughing at B's misery. I clapped, "OP, you turned an accident into the ultimate revenge." Do you think this revenge was hilarious? Internet reactions and theories. OP's story exploded on Reddit, getting more engagement than B got phone calls. Team OP. B got what he deserved. If you scam people, you deal with the consequences. Honestly, OP should have also posted the number on Craigslist. Team B. Okay, OP went too far. A wrong number is one thing, but reposting it was a bit much. Poor B. Next time OP sells a house, will they use B's number too? I was dying of laughter but firmly sided with OP. B scammed, B suffered. OP trolled like a pro. A final thought, was B too overconfident? I have a longer theory for you to consider. Did B not only scam OP but also assume OP wouldn't do anything about it? Maybe he thought, I owe money, but what can they do? Or was he just arrogant, thinking, I'll change my number, problem solved? Only to underestimate the reach of the internet? I suspect he wasn't scared of phone calls but just too ashamed to face people. Either way, OP's revenge wasn't just sweet, it was both hilarious and genius. But I wonder, if OP hadn't reposted the ad, would B have escaped? And if B had apologized, would OP have stopped? One last hilarious detail OP shared had me rolling. Months later, B was telling mutual friends, I got so many calls, I'm now scared of unknown numbers. I texted him, pay me back my $200, and I'll remove the ad. He blocked me immediately. I thought, B, you lost forever. OP, you didn't just win, you left a legacy. What do you think? Was OP brilliant or was B just unlucky? Ever pulled off revenge like this? Drop a comment, I'm curious. Next up, we have another wild IDontWorkHereLady story. Don't go anywhere. Story 3, Humor. I do work here, but not right now. Next, we have an IDontWorkHereLady drama where OP was mistaken for an employee at her own workplace, but in the most hilarious way possible. OP is a retail worker at a clothing store, the kind of place with messy folded t-shirt stacks, the scent of cheap perfume lingering in the air, pop music playing from small corner speakers, and bright white lights shining on a glossy tiled floor covered in shoe marks. OP writes, I work at this clothing store, but I was off shift that day. A customer still insisted I help, so I trolled her a little, and the entire store had a good laugh. The main character of this drama is Mrs. K, a typical entitled customer. OP describes her as around 50 years old, with messy dyed blonde hair, wearing a flashy floral coat, carrying a huge handbag, speaking in a loud, market announcer-like voice, and acting like she's the queen of shopping. OP recalls, Mrs. K mistook me for a staff member even though I was off duty and demanded I serve her. I wasn't having it, and the way I handled it made her embarrass herself. OP just wanted to do some personal shopping on her day off, but Mrs. K's arrogance set the stage for a sweet little troll that had me clapping and laughing. This is a story about misunderstandings, entitlement, and a hilarious twist. Are you ready? Brace yourself, because Mrs. K is about to dig her own grave, and OP is going to make you cheer for nearly 40 minutes. The drama kicks off on a busy Saturday afternoon, with the clothing store packed with weekend shoppers. OP writes, I was wearing a black hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap, nothing like the employee uniform of a blue polo. I was browsing the discount rack, holding a few shirts when Mrs. K appeared. She marched over from the women's section, her bag clanking, eyes scanning for someone to boss around, and then she shouted over the store's music, Hey, you! Get me that shirt! I was stunned and turned to her, sorry, I'm not working right now. Mrs. K frowned, her voice booming, Don't be lazy, I see you standing there, do your job. OP writes, I stood there, listening to her command, and thought, all right, lady, you want me to work? Let's play. Meanwhile, I just wanted to yell, Mrs. K, you've got the wrong person, and you're shouting about it. The drama escalates as OP playfully trolls Mrs. K, who unknowingly makes herself look worse. OP continues, I shrugged and smiled, yeah, I do work here, but I'm off shift, so you'll have to call someone else. Mrs. K's face turned red as she slammed her bag onto the rack, making shirts fall. Off? What do you mean off? You're here, so you work. Get me that shirt. I calmly replied, I'm not on duty. You can ask over there. Mrs. K growled, I don't care. If you work here, you serve me. I crossed my arms, right now, I'm a customer. Get it yourself. OP writes, Mrs. K stood there, yelling while I smirked, thinking, let's see what you do now. Another shopper, a guy picking out jackets, muttered, what's with this lady? Meanwhile, I was internally cheering, OP, you made her flounder in the middle of the store. The drama intensifies when OP's coworkers and the manager get involved. OP explains, Mrs. K didn't stop, she grabbed my arm and ordered, come with me and get that shirt now. I pulled away, let go of me, or I'm calling the manager. She shrieked, go ahead. I'll have you fired. I called my coworker, T, a 25-year-old woman in the actual blue polo, hey, this lady wants me to help even though I'm off duty. T laughed, she's off shift, ma'am. Do you need help? Mrs. K pointed at me, she's lazy. I want her to do it. T shrugged, she's not working right now. I can help instead. OP writes, Mrs. K froze, hands trembling, and I thought, let's call the manager for even more fun. The manager, H, a 35-year-old guy in a white dress shirt, stepped in, asking, what's going on here? Meanwhile, I was dying of laughter inside. OP, you made Mrs. K embarrass herself in front of the entire staff. The drama reaches its peak when Mrs. K faces the consequences. OP shares, Mrs. K pointed at me again, she's refusing to work, fire her. H looked at me. Are you off shift? I nodded. Yep, I'm just a customer right now. H turned to Mrs. K. She's not on duty. I can help you, though. Mrs. K yelled. I don't want you, I want her. H replied calmly, she's off. Either pick your own shirt, or I'll escort you out. Mrs. K grumbled, this store is terrible, I'm not buying anything, and stormed toward the exit, only to crash into a rack, sending shirts tumbling everywhere. OP writes, I stood there watching her stumble, feeling victorious. T chuckled, that lady is hilarious. Meanwhile, I was gleeful, OP, you made Mrs. K humiliate herself on your day off. The final punchline lands when Mrs. K leaves, and OP enjoys her victory. OP shares, Mrs. K stomped out, leaving a mess behind. H turned to me and said, if you're off, try not to get mistaken for staff next time. I laughed, yeah, I'll hide better next time. T later retold the story to the next shift, and the whole team cracked up, you were off duty and still got dragged into this, legendary. OP concludes, I went home and told my friend about it. They said, you trolled her just the right amount, brilliant. Now, whenever I'm off, I avoid the racks to avoid another scene. I was clapping, OP, you turned your day off into a masterpiece of trolling. What do you think, was this a genius move? OP writes, after that incident, Mrs. K became a store legend, while I felt satisfied for executing the perfect troll. Reddit exploded with comments, more crowded than a Black Friday sale. Team OP cheered, Mrs. K deserved that. Entitlement at its finest, and OP played it perfectly. One person added, if I were OP, I'd pretend to be an employee and lead her around the whole store. Meanwhile, Team Mrs. K argued, come on, she just made a mistake, OP could have helped a little. Someone joked, next time, OP should wear the uniform on their day off just to troll harder. I was laughing but firmly on OP's side, Mrs. K, if you make a mistake, own it. OP was off duty but still legendary. I have a longer theory for you to ponder, was Mrs. K really just mistaken, or was she trying to exert power? Maybe she thought, I'm the customer, so everyone must serve me. But she didn't expect OP to stand her ground. Or maybe she was just in a rush, like, I need a shirt now, so everyone must be staff. I also suspect she made a scene hoping to get special treatment, but instead, the whole store laughed at her. Either way, OP handled it brilliantly, not just escaping the mix-up but turning Mrs. K's entitlement into an unforgettable joke. But I wonder, if OP had helped, would Mrs. K have even said thanks? And if H hadn't stepped in, would this drama have gone on even longer? Here's a hilarious postscript. A few weeks later, OP was back on shift and spotted Mrs. K in the store, keeping her distance and browsing without demanding help. OP asked T, she's not yelling anymore? T laughed, nope. After last time, she just picks her own stuff now. OP thought, Mrs. K, you lost the whole store battle. OP, you didn't just win, you taught her independence. What do you think? Was OP a genius, or do you feel bad for Mrs. K? Have you ever been mistaken like this? Story 4, Humor, the mistake of helping someone. Next up, we have an IDontWorkHereLady drama where OP learned a valuable lesson, never help strangers, or you might get stuck for life. OP was just an ordinary shopper at a large grocery store, the kind with long, cluttered aisles, the scent of pastries mixing with the crackling sound of store announcements, and bright fluorescent lights reflecting off shiny tiled floors covered in cart tracks. OP writes, I just wanted to help a lady find something, but she mistook me for an employee and caused chaos in the store. I trolled her a little, and the result was hilarious. Meet Mrs. T, a haughty customer whom OP describes as around 60 years old, with messy silver hair tied lopsidedly, wearing a worn-out red sweater, pushing a cart full of random items, with a voice as sharp as a fire alarm and an attitude as if she were the VIP of the supermarket. OP recalls, she asked for my help, then clung to me like a personal assistant. I couldn't hold back, and the way I handled it made her embarrass herself. OP just wanted to buy groceries and go home, but kindness paved the way for a sweet drama that had me clapping and laughing. This is a story of goodwill, misunderstanding, and an unexpected troll. Are you ready? Buckle up, because Mrs. T is about to sink, and OP will have you entertained for nearly 40 minutes straight. The drama began on a Friday evening, when the grocery store was packed with weekend shoppers. OP writes, I was wearing a gray t-shirt, jeans, and headphones, not the blue uniform of store employees, just browsing the canned goods aisle, checking a soup label, when Mrs. T appeared. She pushed her cart from the next aisle, its wheels rattling, scanning for someone to boss around, and shouted over the loudspeaker, Hey, you! Get me that sauce bottle from the top shelf. I turned, took off my headphones. Sure, I'll grab it for you. I reached for the bottle, handed it to her, thinking, that's it, I'll move on now. OP adds. I stood there, handing her the bottle, thinking, a little help won't hurt. Meanwhile, I wanted to scream, OP, you're too nice, but beware. The drama escalated when Mrs. T latched onto OP like a personal servant. OP recalls, Mrs. T took the bottle, smiled, good, now follow me and get more stuff. I was stunned. I don't work here, I just helped you. Mrs. T frowned, her shrill voice rising, don't argue, you're good at this, get me some vegetables. I replied, ma'am, I'm a customer, not an employee. She banged her cart, making a can of beans roll out. What kind of customer helps me? Keep going. I shrugged. I helped once, now you're on your own. OP writes, she stood there yelling while I laughed, thinking, helping her was a mistake. Another shopper, a guy with a cart full of items, muttered, what's up with this lady? Meanwhile, I was entertained. OP, you've been turned into her errand boy. OP pushed the drama to new heights with a light troll, making Mrs. T embarrass herself. OP recounts, Mrs. T wouldn't stop, she grabbed my arm, follow me, hurry up and get my stuff. I pulled away, let go, I don't work here. She shrieked, lazy employee. Call the manager. I smirked, go ahead, I'd love to see this. She stormed off to customer service, dragging along an actual employee, Ms. N, around 30, wearing the blue uniform, pointing at me, he refuses to work. Fire him. Ms. N looked at me, do you work here? I replied, nope, just helped her once. Ms. N turned to Mrs. T, he's not an employee, but I can help you. OP writes, Mrs. T froze, her hands shaking, and I thought, might as well call the manager for extra fun. Meanwhile, I was dying of laughter. OP, you just made her shoot herself in the foot in front of the staff. The drama intensified when Mrs. T humiliated herself and faced the consequences. OP recalls, she yelled, I don't need you. I want him to do it. Ms. N shrugged, he doesn't work here. Do you want help or not? Mrs. T turned to me, you tricked me. I'll sue the store. I crossed my arms, go ahead, but I am a customer. The manager, Mr. Q, around 40, wearing a white shirt, walked over, what's all this commotion? Mrs. T pointed at me, he's pretending to be staff. Kick him out. Mr. Q looked at me, do you work here? I chuckled, nope, I just helped her once, and now she's after me. Mr. Q turned to Mrs. T, he's a customer. If you're causing a scene, I'll have to ask you to leave. Mrs. T grumbled, this store is awful, and pushed her cart toward the exit, knocking a can of soup onto the floor, where it shattered. OP writes, I stood there, watching her performance with satisfaction, thinking, helping her was my biggest mistake. Ms. N laughed, she's hilarious, don't help next time. Meanwhile, I was delighted, OP, you made her embarrass herself in the middle of the supermarket. The climax came when Mrs. T left, and OP learned a lesson. OP recalls, she stormed out, leaving a mess behind. Mr. Q told me, next time, don't help, she might latch onto you again. I laughed, got it, lesson learned. Ms. N told her co-workers, and the whole team laughed, you helped once and almost got hired. OP writes, I went home and told my friend, who said, dude, you trolled her perfectly. Now, whenever I go to the supermarket, I stay far away from anyone needing help. Meanwhile, I applauded, OP, you turned kindness into an artful troll. What do you think? Was OP's response hilarious? OP wrote, after that incident, Mrs. T became a warning sign, never help strangers. But I had fun trolling her in the chaos. The Reddit comments exploded like fireworks, even busier than the supermarket on weekends. Team OP cheered, she deserved it. Why did she latch onto him? OP played it perfectly. Someone added, if I were OP, I'd pretend to be staff and lead her around. Meanwhile, Team Mrs. T said, come on, she's old, OP should have helped a bit more. Another joked, next time, OP should wear a uniform and troll her again. I was laughing too hard, but I sided with OP, Mrs. T, if you're mistaken, just own it, OP trolled flawlessly. I have a longer theory for you to consider. Was Mrs. T just mistaken, or was she deliberately taking advantage of OP? Maybe she thought, I'm old, people must help me, but didn't expect OP to stand firm and the store to turn against her. Or was she just in too much of a hurry, thinking, I need my items now? Anyone is an employee. So she clung to OP without checking properly? I even suspect she exaggerated the situation, expecting to get special treatment, but didn't expect Mr. Q to let her sink. Either way, I think OP handled it brilliantly, not only escaping the mix-up but turning kindness into an unforgettable joke, both clever and hilarious. But I do wonder, if OP had helped a bit more, would she have stopped? And if Mr. Q hadn't stepped in, would the drama have dragged on longer? One last hilarious update from OP. A few weeks later, he returned to the supermarket and saw Mrs. T pushing her cart alone, not daring to ask anyone for help. OP writes, I asked Ms. N. She's not clinging to anyone now. Ms. N laughed, nope, after getting rejected, she behaves now. I thought, Mrs. T, you've lost to the entire store. OP, you didn't just win, you taught her independence. What do you think, was OP too smart, or was Mrs. T just unlucky? Have you ever been hassled for helping someone? So there you have it, an IDontWorkHereLady tale that left me both satisfied and amused. A persistent customer clung to kindness but ended up humiliating herself because OP was too witty. Who could have predicted this? Are you on Team OP or Team Mrs. T? Got any helping gone wrong dramas to share? Drop a comment, I'm curious. Up next, we have a case of malicious compliance, stay tuned. Story 5, humor firing someone who doesn't work here because. Finally, we arrive at a malicious compliance drama where OP turns an unreasonable demand into a perfect troll, making the troublemaker embarrass herself. OP is a retail worker at a home goods store, the kind of place with tall shelves packed with pans and pots, the scent of new plastic mixing with soft background music, and bright white lights reflecting off the polished wooden floor, covered in footprints. OP writes, a lady demanded that my manager fire someone who doesn't even work here, so I followed her request to the letter, and the result had the whole store in stitches. The main character of this drama is Mrs. C, an entitled customer whom OP describes as about 45 years old, with glossy blonde-dyed hair, wearing an expensive leather jacket, holding the latest smartphone, speaking in a voice as sharp as a knife, and acting as if she owned the store. OP explains, Mrs. C mistook another customer for an employee and demanded that he be fired. I maliciously complied, and watching it all unfold was glorious. OP just wanted a peaceful shift, but Mrs. C's arrogance paved the way for a brilliant troll that had me clapping and laughing at the same time. This is a story of mistaken identity, power, and an absolute masterclass in malicious compliance. Are you ready? Buckle up, because Mrs. C is about to embarrass herself, and OP is going to give you 40 minutes of pure satisfaction. The drama begins. It all started on a Wednesday afternoon, when the home goods store was moderately busy with a few customers browsing. OP writes, I was behind the checkout counter, a scratched-up old wooden register station, next to a stack of receipts and some discount flyers, doing inventory when Mrs. C walked in. She strolled through the kitchenware aisle, phone in hand, eyes scanning for someone to boss around, and then shouted over the store music, Hey, you there! Why aren't you helping me pick a frying pan? OP looked up and saw that Mrs. C was pointing at another customer, Mr. D, a man in his 30s wearing a red hoodie, casually browsing pressure cookers. I replied, "Ma'am, he doesn't work here. Let me assist you instead." Mrs. C frowned. "Don't argue. I saw him wandering around. Call the manager and fire him." OP writes. I stood there, listening to her ridiculous demand and thought, all right, lady, you want him fired? I'll give you a firing you won't forget. I wanted to shout, Mrs. C, you're mistaken in demanding power you don't even have. Malicious compliance in action. As OP maliciously complied, Mrs. C unknowingly set herself up for humiliation. OP writes. I shrugged and smiled slightly. All right, let me call the manager and get him fired. Mrs. C crossed her arms. Good. Do it quickly. So OP grabbed the old, static-filled walkie-talkie and radioed. Hey, Nam, can you come to the front? While waiting, OP turned to Mr. D and whispered. Dude, this lady wants you fired. Mr. D chuckled. I don't even work here. Mrs. C, however, was not having it. Don't lie. I saw you standing here. OP responded with a straight face. Ma'am, he's a customer, but since you're insisting, I'll follow your order. At this point, other shoppers were starting to notice the commotion. One woman picking out knives mumbled. She's hilarious, trying to fire a customer. And I was internally cheering, OP, you've set Mrs. C up to sink in her own stupidity. The manager joins the fun. The drama escalated when the shift manager, Nam, entered the scene, and the troll continued. OP writes. Nam, our 35-year-old manager in a crisp white shirt, walked up and asked, what's going on? Mrs. C pointed aggressively at Mr. D. He's not doing his job. Fire him now. Nam turned to Mr. D. Sir, do you work here? Mr. D laughed. Nope, just shopping. OP jumped in. Ma'am insisted that he be fired, so I'm just following orders. Nam smirked. Well, ma'am, I'm officially firing him then. He turned to Mr. D and mockingly announced. Sir, you're fired. Please leave immediately. Mr. D played along, dramatically gasping. Oh no! I lost my job. Then, he casually pushed his cart and continued shopping. Mrs. C froze, her hands trembling in frustration. OP writes. At that moment, I thought, lady, you wanted someone fired. Wish granted. Meanwhile, the knife-shopping woman burst out laughing. This is gold, firing a customer. And I was in stitches. OP, you just made Mrs. C shoot herself in the foot in front of the manager. The inevitable meltdown. Things only got worse for Mrs. C as the consequences of her entitled behavior hit her hard. OP writes. Mrs. C screamed, are you all making fun of me? I'm not buying anything. Nam remained completely unfazed. Ma'am, you asked us to fire him. We did. What else do you want? Mrs. C turned on OP. You're getting fired next. I'm suing this store. OP grinned. Go ahead, ma'am. I just followed your request. In a rage, she slammed her phone on the counter, knocking over the discount flyers, and shrieked. Terrible management. Terrible employees. Then, in her huff, she stormed toward the exit, only to bump into a shelf, knocking down a pile of frying pans, sending them clattering to the floor. OP writes. I stood there, watching her self-destruct, thinking, that's what you get for trying to fire a customer. Meanwhile, Mr. D walked back to the counter, smirking. Thanks for firing me. That was fun. And I was howling, OP, you just made her humiliate herself in broad daylight. The ultimate victory. With Mrs. C gone, OP basked in the afterglow of a perfectly executed troll. OP writes. As she left behind a pile of fallen pans, Nam turned to me and said, next time a customer asks for someone to be fired, just do the same thing. I laughed. Got it, boss. Later, Mr. D returned to the counter, joking. I got fired, but I'm still shopping. That's gotta be a first. The entire team retold the story to the next shift, and everyone had a great laugh. At home, OP shared the story with a friend, who responded, "Dude, you maliciously complied her into the ground. That was legendary." Now, whenever OP hears someone demand a firing, they just chuckle. And I'm applauding. OP, you turned an unreasonable demand into an absolute work of art. The aftermath. A few weeks later, OP provided an update that had me dying of laughter. Mrs. C came back, but this time, she stayed quiet and just browsed. I asked Nam, "She's not firing anyone today?" Nam grinned, "Nope. After last time, she's on her best behavior." And I thought, Mrs. C, you lost. OP, you didn't just win, you taught her to stay silent. So, what do you think? Was OP a genius or was Mrs. C just unlucky? Have you ever pulled off a troll like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I'm dying to know.